Hi, my name is Ellen. I am currently a middle school special ed teacher at a private school in Brooklyn where I teach my students every subject, so they're with me all day. For this video today, I'm going to be outlining the Progressions website, which is basically a database for teachers, and it breaks up everything that students learn through math from K to 5, and even has some things for the older grades as well. I'm going to be focusing on the measurement portion, which breaks down measurement into a couple different subsets and basically tells us as teachers what we need to be focusing on and what are the key points in each grade. So it starts with kindergarten, and I'm going to go through 5th grade. It also highlights on how important linear succession is and how important that movement is from one grade to the other. And students can't master the concepts in the following grade until they're comfortable at the grade where they are. If a student in 3rd grade doesn't know the 2nd, 1st, and kindergarten standards, it's going to be very hard for them to move on as the grades get harder and the skills are more tough. They get tougher as we go on. I think that this is a really important way for students to learn, and I think that the website does a really nice job of showing how things kind of build on top of each other. In addition, as they're talking about the current grade that they're working on, they also reference standards and things that the students should have already known. So I think that it's important to not only assess the grade that we're currently teaching, but to also take a look back at the standards that the students should have learned. I think as teachers, sometimes we get stuck. If we're a 3rd grade teacher, we get stuck in 3rd grade and we're kind of zero in on what we need to be focused on, but we forget about what comes before and what comes after. And I think the Progression website helps us to realize that not only do we need to focus on the skills, but we need to set them up for success in future grades, as well as make sure that there aren't any holes from the grades below. So as the video progresses, I'm going to walk us through kindergarten through 5th grade, and I hope it gives us a nice overview. Thanks! Hi, so as the Progressions website starts with kindergarten, it's going to break measurement up into a couple of nice different subsets for students and teachers to focus on as they progress through measurement. So the first thing that we want to start on as kindergarten teachers is comparing objects. We want to compare objects based on their attributes, and the word attribute we also want to make students familiar with. An attribute is something that we can compare two objects to. It's a physicality of an object is what I'm looking at. So if I take two objects like a pair of scissors and a marker, I'm not only comparing their length, but I want students to start to recognize attributes that I can compare them by. I can compare them by color. Maybe I can compare them by weight. I can compare them by the shapes that they are making. I can compare them by all these different things. That's going to help us, and later on when we talk about geometry and we're comparing other shapes with angles. But right now we're just looking at the physical nature of each shape, and I'm comparing them by length. I can either compare them long ways and I can compare them tall way, but either way I do it, the marker always extends longer than my scissors can. We want students to be aware of that. We're just looking at two different shapes or two different figures, and I think for this, manipulatives is really important. We want the students to experience the shapes. We want them to experience the objects for what they are. They need to hold them in their hands. They need to, figure out a system of measuring them with their bodies or with their sight. I think it's really important in these younger grades, especially, to use things that they can hold on to and that they can experience. We're just exposing them in kindergarten, and we want them to be aware of all the different elements of measurement that they can be. So we are starting to think about length and width, but we're not using vocabulary terms. We're not kind of muddying up the waters with technicalities. We're just being very basic. We're looking at shapes. Which one is longer? Which one is taller? Use a student's vocabulary. Use their thinking. We don't want to get anything too tangled or too confused, because those are things that we will eventually build on. The last thing that we're going to focus on in kindergarten is area and volume, but in a very foundational way, a very basic way. And it's a way that I never thought about in kindergarten of experiencing. You think of area and volume as something that you start learning about in 4th or 5th grade, but really we can start exposing our students to it much younger. And we're just doing it in terms of which object is taking up more space. If I'm holding these objects in my hands, which one is taking up more space? And in this case, it's the scissor. And that's area. It's what is taking up more space, and that's an area problem. If I'm using a liquid problem, how much can I pack in something? That's volume, and I don't think that we realize that as teachers. So these are just kind of concepts that we want to expose our students to. That way they're very familiar when they get to the next grade. All right, I'll see you in 1st grade. Okay, so in first grade, we're going to start with basically the same elements that we did in kindergarten, but we're just bumping it up a little bit. We're making it a little more challenging for our students. So in kindergarten, where I was comparing two objects directly, now I'm going to start comparing them indirectly by adding a third object. So I'm going to add a purple marker now. And now I'm comparing both of these shapes to my purple marker. And I see that the scissor is taller as well as the pink marker. So now I can say that both of these objects, I'm going to put them in a group. These objects are going to be in my taller group. They're taller than the purple marker. And then once students can do that, we can add more shapes. We can add more objects for them to compare. Once we've mastered that concept, we're going to start ordering them based on size. So now this would be my order. I'm sequencing them, or I could do it in reverse sequence, and now this is my order. So it's important for students to really not only now work with two objects, but work with more. How many objects can we sequence? And this is going to be challenging for students, especially once they see, maybe a set of 5 objects. It's more challenging than just looking at 2. If I look at 2, at this point I can tell. But now with 5, I'm really comparing. I really have to hold objects up to each other, and I really have to make sure which one has the longer length. Another thing that I want to be comparing is I'm matching lengths. If I have a piece of string and 2 pieces of spaghetti, even though the 2 pieces of spaghetti are smaller than the string, if I compare them, they might add up to the same length. And we want to start exposing students to objects that can be smaller, but more of them that can add up to the same length. I also want to start kind of structuring my measurement a little bit more. Maybe I can use something like a piece of string to measure the length of my forearm, and then I can measure my foot. I can measure the length of my classroom using more standard forms of measurement, but we're not talking about units just yet. And we're going to little focus on more on area and volume by packing a space or pouring liquid into different cylinders and different containers. Again, this visual experience is really important for students to kind of connect with and learn. And we want to connect that physical, everyday sense with a textbook sense. We want to kind of marry those two things together. So those are the basic things that we are working on in first grade. We're kind of setting the framework a little more to be a little more structured, and so that when we get into second grade, when we introduce those numbers and we introduce more technical tools, our students are ready for it. Okay. Second grade. So second grade is kind of where it's at for measurements. That's where we start exposing our students to measurement tools, and we start using math tools every day. And a math tool in second grade is looking like a ruler. It can look like a meter stick, or it's looking like measuring tapes. So we're experiencing measurement as now having attributes of numbers. Now, the first thing that you want to do is you want to have a lesson for students about how to use these tools. Students don't come into school knowing how to use a ruler, so we want to make sure that we spend an adequate amount of time showing students that when we use a ruler, we're measuring it not at the end of the ruler, but at the first tick mark. We're showing students, how to measure things using the ruler. So we do want to spend a good amount of time on that before we can have students measuring things on their own. So what we can do now is we want to make sure that when students are measuring stuff, they're not leaving space. Now we're going to be measuring maybe a row of crayons, and we want to make sure that there's no space in between those crayons when we're measuring it. We want to do an accumulation of distance, and we want to make sure that students realize that the end of the ruler doesn't mean that that's it. That's as big as things can be. Things can't just be larger than 12. We want to make sure that students can know how to measure things that are larger when using a ruler, where to stop. We also want students to understand that if this marker is 5 inches long, that it's doesn't stop at the 5, but it's an accumulation. It's from the end of the ruler to the 5. It's not just the 5 mark is how much this marker is. We also want to connect measuring to physical units. We want to bridge that I know this is longer with an actual number. So these scissors are 4 inches long, and I want to start formulating that in the mind of a second grader. I'm also going to be comparing and combining. So if I have something that is 6 inches and I have 2 objects that are each 4 inches, is that longer than the first object, or is it shorter? We want students to be able to be using their basic arithmetic now in compilation with measurement. And that takes time for a second grader to learn, but we need to be aware of that, and we need to be structuring that for our second graders. We also want to think about spatial structuring and how big objects are in terms of the space that they're taking up. In terms of the width now as across as opposed to tall. A taller object might be taller and might have a longer length, but the space that it's taking up could be more. And in this grade, we're going to start introducing more technical vocabulary terms. We're going to introduce area, we're going to introduce volume, we're going to introduce kind of lengths of measure, inches and feet and things like that. So we're getting more technical as this time is going on, and the second grade is kind of really the foundation for measurement, and we need to make sure that we have strong students here so that they can continue to grow as measurement.